Welcome to the Branded Content That Works podcast, your new go-to resource for practical insights and expert knowledge in the world of branded content. I'm your host, Stine Holmgaard, and I'm thrilled to launch a show that brings together professionals, creators, and thought leaders from across the globe to share their experiences and expertise in this dynamic field. In this special Prologue episode, I'm joined by podcast expert Bjørn Barfoed Vestergaard. Together with him, I will put some of my reflections regarding launching yet another podcast to the test, and he'll share his take on what's important when deciding to venture into podcasting. If you're intrigued after listening in, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe to the podcast. Going forward, I'll be dropping a new episode every other week or so. Let's dive into this conversation that hopefully marks the beginning of a beautiful journey together. Okay, so this is the very first time I'm pressing play on the Branded Content That Works podcast. And this is a prologue. This is not even a real episode. But before getting myself into the weeds, I've come to the realization that not having a journalistic background and hence not knowing how to structure a decent interview, and also never having worked in the space of podcasts, it might be a good idea to call up someone that I have on speed dial that knows everything there is to know about podcasting. At least I feel that's the truth. I'm joined today by Bjørn Barfoed Vestergaard, and he's not only my know-it-all kind of podcast guy, has run some of Denmark's leading business podcasts, including one of my favorites called Rollemodellerne. And he's been interviewing entrepreneurs like Lars Seier and Jacob Riesgaard. So he's been around the block when it comes to podcasting. These days, he leads his own company called AMP99. But before then, he has held multiple strategic roles in digital branding and marketing across some of Denmark's major media and entertainment players. So when it comes to podcasting, Bjørn, you are my go-to guy. And we've also spoken a little bit back and forth prior to this interview today. So you kind of know what I'm up to. And this episode today is also very much to just have a little chat about what works, how to make sure that I don't fall straight into the pitfalls when it comes to podcasting, and maybe also just bouncing my ideas a bit back and forth on this brand new podcast. But before diving into that, I actually think it would be nice that you just gave a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Tina. I'm really happy to be on your speed dial. And first and foremost, actually, I would just like to congratulate you. I mean, I'm actually a little bit envious that you get to do your first podcast once again. I was in your shoes back 8 years ago and had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I can honestly say this. We are just 1 week shy of the Global International Podcasting Day. And it actually made me think about how podcasting have impacted my life and the shift it made. And honestly, everything that I am and where I am today have happened more or less due to my decision to go into podcasting. It's, I mean, for me, honestly, I can say both from a personal but also from a professional perspective, podcasting has been a life changer. I do believe that you and I are actually quite similar in that we really, really love what we do. We are really passionate about what we do in our jobs and in the branded content space and in marketing. And getting that playground up and running professionally where you actually can bounce off ideas with very clever people. Oftentimes, at least in my case, these people have been much cleverer than me. That is something that is really beneficial from a lot of different perspectives. Right? I don't know if there's so more sort of words I almost can put to the very nice and generous introduction you gave to me. As you said, I have been working with podcasting for quite some years now, both as a podcast producer, but also on the commercial side of podcasting. So I think I will probably put a few words on that. Over the last couple of years, I built AMP99, which is a podcast marketing agency from the ground up. And today I can say that we are serving some of the most interesting and biggest brands in Denmark with podcast advertising. So
Indeed you are.
That's definitely a journey. And I think that have given both from a branded podcast perspective, but podcasts as a medium of influence have given me some pretty significant insights into what podcasting does, what works, what doesn't. And then I've had, I think, a lot of conversations like this with people starting their first podcast and trying to share my best experiences. So I've really been looking forward to today's talk with you on this prologue.
Yeah, and while you dared to kamikaze yourself out into the podcasting business, I think I've been listening to podcasts for maybe even longer than 8 years, thinking about potentially starting a podcast, not knowing what it should be about and not really daring to truly, take a leap of faith up until today. And as you know, I finally feel that the timing is now. So I might be kind of a late boomer jumping on the bandwagon here. I realize that. But at the Institute, we've been building a community for years and years that holds so many very, very insightful and very talented people that all work in the branded content space. So I kind of felt that doing a podcast dedicated to branded content, and maybe not so much from like the overall strategic, how to lead, how to organize, and how to operate around branded content, but more so how to go about branded content on a daily basis, like the pitching and the selling and the attention and tension there might be between, working with clients, the collaborations, getting that great idea, realizing it, distributing, seeing that what you've actually ideated turned out to work. And so you may say maybe a bit more operational, more so than management and strategy.
Maybe just to put a few words on that also, Stine, but just because I think, honestly, I think you have an almost unfair advantage, I'll actually call it, because I mean, for me, and not to go into like what works and what doesn't on podcast, but I think that having that very keen understanding about your audience, what are their pain points, how are their lives evolving, like what are they struggling with in their lives, actually makes for the best podcast, basically. I think I read this in a content marketing book that's called High Impact Content Marketing. And I actually do believe that one of the most valuable assets you can have when you are building content, whether that be on podcast or any other mean or channel, is actually empathy. It's actually that you know your audience very well. You know their struggles, you know their pain points. So I would say, I know how much you've been in this space. I know how much you have been in the weeds of the branded content space. So I do believe also that you have a significant advantage in terms of actually creating a valuable and good podcast. So I think congratulations on taking the first step, because I think what you need most of the time, what people is missing is actually just taking the first step and then just figuring out as they go, right?
I'm happy that you look at it that way, Bjørn. But as said before, and I don't think this should be a prologue about the technical stuff, but you kind of, you kind of know my raison d'etre for this. You know that I am quite well connected. I'm very curious. I also believe that the curiosity is very much what's going to drive this podcast forward. I have spent months thinking about conceptualizing and making a structure for the podcast. But at the end of the day, I also believe that this is something that needs to be formed and kind of develop as we go. I'm going to test a few things with the interviews that I do. So what I set out to do might change as we go about it, but let's see. That said, I'm kind of hoping that I could just get a bit of tips and tricks from your end, just to make sure that I'm not diving headfirst into pitfalls that I should avoid.
Yeah, you are opening up a Pandora's box here, Stine. There's, because I would say, so I mean, there's quite a lot of things to say when it comes to pitfalls and so how to do it. I actually believe significantly so that you have the right approach by starting off at a point, but also acknowledging that you can lean in to your audience and figuring out actually how the format evolves over the span of a lifetime of a podcast, right? And I do believe one of the things, honestly, that I think is a little bit underrated when it comes to like podcast creation and the process of creating really strong podcasts is actually that you lean into the data you have available. And I think many people have a sort of mindset around creating, for example, a podcast where it is, ship, done, next. But honestly, you have the analytics, you have the data, you can actually, when you do understand what resonates well with your audience and what doesn't, if you lean into the feedback, if you lean into how they are enjoying what you're doing, it actually gives you a foundation for creating a very strong podcast. And I do believe that the first recommendation I will give is also be very explorative in your approach to it. So, I can tell you, I can start off by telling you the first, I think, major mistake I think I did when I did my own podcast, role models, or rollemodellerne, as they call in Danish. I think one of my biggest, I think it was during probably episode 7 or 8, or something like that, when I did that. And that was like a ton of years ago now these days. But the point is that I think I interviewed a guest and I had this preconceived notion about who the guest was. And it took like maybe 10 or 15 minutes into the interview for me to actually realize that all of the ideas I had about this specific guest were wrong. So essentially, the guests were like a totally another person that I actually thought. Luckily, we had a good conversation still, but I actually almost screwed it up because I had this frame about how I wanted the interview to go and who this person was as a person. And basically, all the assumption I had were wrong about. But I would say, in my defense, though, this was a person, I interview a lot of high-profile people, entrepreneurs, like sports people, actors. But the point is that this specific person didn't really have many public interviews. So I actually did my research, but I just didn't have a chance to catch up on that. But I do believe, like, for your sake, like, you interview people who are very skilled in this space. So I also do believe that you have a chance to also get the best sort of foundation for a good conversation by actually doing proper research. And then also I need to highlight the fact that this was also pre-AI. So that also meant that I didn't even have a AI chatbot. I could sort of play around a little bit for the interview. So I would say, coming without any preconceived notion about your guests, having an idea of the outline, but also allowing for exploration together or co-creating a good conversation, I think is actually crucial, that you are taking your biases and then putting them back in the backpack, basically, right?
Noted. Also, because you and I, we speak a lot, I feel. I know that you have an opinion of just the right mix of a podcast. I know that you almost want to raise an army against boring podcasts.
Yeah.
But what would your advice be in terms of securing the right mix of social or humorous elements versus the more insightful and the nerdiness?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, Stine. And I think there's two answers to it that actually I think are probably laughably obvious, but still people tend to forget. I can take one. I made a decision very early on when I did rollemodellerne that I actually only wanted to do interviews that I wanted to do. So essentially, if I wasn't really passionate about interviewing a person, I wouldn't do them, essentially, right? I think that is, for me, that have been a defining decision simply because it's much easier to have a good conversation if you're actually enjoying the conversations. And that is a privilege you have as a podcast host. And sometimes I get called up by journalists who want to pitch public relations interviews at the podcast, and I always decline politely. But the point is, when I tell about the podcast, when I tell about how I do it, they're like a little bit envious because they need to do interviews they don't want to do sometimes because that's their job as a journalist. It's not your job to do interviews that you don't want to do. It's actually your job to find people you are really, really passionate about meeting and having the best possible conversation you can with them. And I think so having that frame of mind that actually you are finding people that you, in terms of nerdiness, enjoying. But then again, also, I think it's, as you're also alluding to, I think having the courage to be yourself on when you're actually interviewing people is just very, really important. And I think, I do enjoy very much Lex Friedman's podcast. I could never do a podcast like him simply because his personality and mine are very different. So I think being yourself when you are talking to other people like we're doing here is just going to be essential as well. And if you find people you are passionate about, if you are doing it in a way that you actually resonate with yourself, you're not trying to impersonate someone else, I think it's very hard for a listener not to feel that sense of authenticity during the podcast, right? So I think that's probably the easy answer. I don't know if that was what you're looking for, Stine, but that is sort of my approach to it, at least.
No, I think that resonates quite well. And I also believe, like, as you're saying, you have podcasts you enjoy, but that you can never do. For me, it's the Rebooting Show with Brian Morrissey. I love that show to death, and that's something I listen to religiously. That said, I'm also very much aware that I am not Brian, and I don't come with a journalistic background, and I'm not that cool cat yet. Let's see, Brian. So I'm still hoping that at least from the beginning that I can kind of dim my imposter syndrome and then just, get on with it. Because as said, I do believe that myself as well, that the foundation for creating a good podcast is definitely here, especially due to my extensive network and all the amazing people in this space.
Yeah. So maybe I can ask you a question, Stine. What did you hope to? I mean, it's a great decision that you have decided to go with Branded Content That Works podcast and launching that. What were you hoping to achieve? Like what?
I think, and it kind of ties into the Native Advertising Institute as well. We launched the Institute 10 plus years ago because we found that there's a lot of digital marketing spaces. There's a lot of advertising and media spaces, communities, but the people in this particular space didn't really have anywhere to go to kind of share knowledge, frustrations, opportunities, dreams, and ideas with like-minded. And I do believe that the podcast here kind of is an extension. I see it as an extension to that, having or introducing a new media where these people can come on the show, share really, really valuable insights with their peers on basically strategic and tactical practice in this space. And I do believe like if we are ultimately to raise the bar both for branded content and native advertising, more people need to know the hows, the whys, and the whens. And the best way that we can do that is by learning from one another. So I'm kind of hoping that with this podcast, the Institute and I will be offering yet another medium where people feel they can kind of lean in and learn from like-minded people, get inspired or get new ideas, maybe even, and ultimately also get a sense of who are the other people in the space. Because typically people tend to know, and you and I are the same as well, we tend to know a lot of people in our own markets. But having an opportunity to kind of connect or even learn from people that sits on the other side of the globe, I think that could potentially be quite powerful. And I think that's where the Institute and I have an upside because we know the practitioners in Australia and New Zealand. We know them in Canada. We know them in Japan and India and Finland and Belgium. So trying to connect the dots and trying to create a space this time with audio where people can learn from each other. I'm kind of hoping to achieve something that hopefully has value to and adds value to our space.
Yeah. And I also do believe that you're actually tying, into something that's really interesting here as well. Like, because you mentioned the community part, which I know from your events as well, that you're really big on actually gathering people and professionals around the specific branded content space, right? And I do believe that one of the things where podcasting also has a very big promise is also in terms of actually creating community and engagement among your audience, right? So I also think like, having that sort of, one of the big trends happening in podcasts right now, I think is going to be very massive over the next couple of years, is also that you actually see now podcasters are going much more like event driven and are going more like back to meeting in person and doing live recording of podcasts and stuff like that, right? And that also ties together with that there is a companionship among the listeners of a podcast. And one of my own favorite podcasters is Tim Ferriss, a huge inspiration for my own podcasting journey. I know that there are held a lot of events around the world when that podcast he did, the Tim Ferriss show, celebrated 10-year anniversary. So essentially people meeting up in random cities just from the fact that they like this podcast, right? And I think it ties together with that. I also do believe that, everybody has a podcast, right? I think that's what everybody says these days. I do believe that it actually also ties quite a lot together with your identity, what you listen to. So it also becomes a part of your own personal brand or own personal preferences, right? So meeting up with like-minded who enjoy the same podcast as you do is also something that is very huge. And when it comes to what you guys are doing in the Native Institute, it's just very, very much about also gathering people who have the same professional passion around something, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I think I'm actually ready to take the leave now. I'm pretty sure too, Bjørn, that this is not going to be the last time we are going to be on a call. Maybe on a podcast call, maybe just on a panic speed dial call as I go about it. But I think for now, I'm very happy that you took the time just to sit in and give me a bit of your insights on this first prologue.
Yeah.
So I think that said, I'm ready.
You're ready. I mean, my job here is done. I mean, so I pushed you over. Maybe.
I will say, though, that leaning into what, are passionate about what you're listening to, this is not going to be a true crime podcast, because that's what I listen to whenever I'm not listening to marketing podcasts. So this is going to be a branded content that works podcast.
Yeah, but that being said, Stine, I do actually believe, I think it's a very valuable point, but I also do believe that honestly, when in doubt, it's really crucial that you are creating something that you would enjoy listening to yourself. I mean, start creating a podcast for yourself, and wouldn't it be strange if there were no other people just like you and me who enjoyed as well? And I do believe that's how all creators start,
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bjørn.
You are more than welcome, Stine. It's been a true pleasure, and I hope that we get a chance to talk more about podcasts.
I'm sure we will. Ciao for now.
Ciao for now.